Hi, you're jumping in on a casual conversation between Joanne Bozeman, Cate Frazier-Neely, and me, Nancy Boss. And what we're talking about is perimenopausal voice. And so enjoy. This is just laid back conversation, and we're glad you're here with us. So, perimenopausal voice. First off, let me just say that we are talking about any woman who is post puberty and premenopause. Now, not every woman from the age of 12 to 51 on average is perimenopausal.
One of the women that we interviewed in our book was about 36
Mhm.
and towards the end of perimenopause. And she tells her story in her book. So she was completely finished with and postmenopause by
Yes.
37.
And I had a woman approach me, direct message me just a couple months ago who was in menopause at 27.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And of course, nobody was able to diagnose that. Like it really was quite a needle in a haystack. She was hypothyroid. And so she thinks that had something to do with it. But,
It,
or
it,
even Hashimoto's, I think, in her
yes,
case.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's definitely association between some thyroid disease and the whole reproductive system, which seems strange, but it is true. Sometimes if you catch it early enough and get on the right medication, it can reverse the process and get somebody back into their regular reproductive.
But I think you need to have a doctor who's willing to look at that because
Absolutely.
I've heard of cases where they'll go talk to their doctor and they'll say, "Oh no, you're way too early for that. We
Hmm.
we're not going to take a hormone draw to check you because that it's way too early." And they eventually either have to insist on it, maybe two draws, like 2 weeks apart because it's only a shot in time, and it's very possible that if you are in perimenopause, it won't show up in that FSH draw. What do you,
Hmm.
FSH draw? And then you go back 2 weeks later, and boom, ta-da!
Yeah.
So you need to have a doctor who is aware that you can be in perimenopause fairly early. And then I do want to say that you can go through perimenopause and menopause without any. There are a few people who go through without any symptoms. They just sail right through. They have no vocal symptoms. More
No
power.
hot flashes, even some 20% of the population doesn't have hot flashes, and that's the most common symptom.
It's incredible, and I'm so glad, and I'm so glad that many women do experience that. But for those of us who don't, it's nice. It's nice to know that there are others.
Yes.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, there are a number of reasons why women might go through perimenopause and menopause young. Some of them, it's just a naturally occurring thing. And they don't really understand why, but it just happens. I have a friend who is 19 years old and she was menopausal. That's exceedingly young, but
Yeah.
it can happen. But the other people, they may have a medical condition that requires chemotherapy that might throw them into menopause. They may have to have their ovaries removed, which again, that's an instant menopause. So there are medical reasons, but then there are these other natural things. I even heard of, this is a real oddball one, but of somebody who got Lyme disease and threw her into
Wow.
early menopause. Now, but these are the off ones, like something like what, 5% go
Yeah.
through this before the age of 40, and something like 10% are menopausal by 45. That
Hmm.
leaves the rest of us in more of that average category of between 45 and 55-ish or late 50s.
I want to jump in with my personal story real quick, and
Yeah.
that is that my mom had a hysterectomy, so nothing to learn there as for how my menopause might be, because that just wasn't an option. My sister didn't hit menopause until she was 56. She's a lot older than me, and so as I was in my 40s, looking at, well, menopause, I'm not going to get there until I'm 56. Any symptom that I had, whole body symptoms, I completely didn't think they were menopause. Also, my ego got in the way because I was always wanted to be 10 years younger than I actually was. When I was 42, I wanted to be 32. When I was 52, I wanted to be 42. And so the idea that I was middle age, menopause, no, that's for old women. So my own mental stuff in my 40s kept me from being proactive about my health and making smarter, more educated decisions that would have helped the impact be a lot less on my life. So I did hit menopause at 52, which is 1 year past the average age of menopause in English-speaking countries. And yeah, I didn't experience voice changes that I know of until a year and a half before menopause. The rest of my body, though, holy cow. And some of the other things that my body went through did impact my performing. Like, can I be on stage for an hour? Should I wear a pad so I don't pee my pants? That kind of stuff was definitely a factor. And then sleep. I didn't realize that my sleep, which is huge for singers, right? You have to sleep well. That was a big problem in perimenopause for me.
And that's when the dryness starts too.
Yeah.
The hydration becomes a real issue.
I didn't have any problems with hydration. Still don't, actually.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Hydration doesn't necessarily fix that gooey, sticky stuff. That it's important to hydrate, absolutely, because it does affect the tissues of, inside the vocal folds, yes. But it may not get the gooey, sticky stuff.
Right, because it's not necessarily about dryness. It's about the function of the mucus glands.
That's right.
Right.
That's a progesterone-y thing. Nancy, I love that you brought that up, and I know it's personal to talk about bladder control.
Oh, it's just you guys, right?
Right. But these issues, I think, are not discussed, and they are a little bit more discussed in the regular marketplace. Right now, we are having discussions about the effect of perimenopause and menopause on women in general in the workplace, and they're saying things like, we need to be close to a bathroom. My office is too far away. I need to have a fan by my desk. Now, how do those things translate to somebody who's maybe a stage performer, who's flooding? These are not comfortable things to talk about, so we don't really hear about them. I had a friend she and her friend were both perimenopause and hot flashing, and they were performing together, and they forgot and they did not wear waterproof makeup.
Oh.
And it was very hot with the lights, and she said they both were sitting there hot flashing, and their makeup just dripped off like simultaneously, and they both had, like raccoon eyes by the end of the play.
Oh no.
But they kept looking. They couldn't do anything about it because they were singing in front of an orchestra. So we laugh about it, but those are important things when you're.
Well, and another woman in our book talked about she would have these heavy periods. Mm-hmm. Now, you stop to think about what you need to have with you. So she would go into a gig, she would go into a performance, and she would have to have a whole bag packed.
Yeah.
Change of clothes, all her pads and stuff, and whatever medications that she needed. And this is another thing that happens since women are having our children later than we did in previous generations. You've got either young children that you're taking care of and or parents that you're taking care of, right? Mm-hmm. And all at a time when you need a tremendous amount of care that you might not realize you need.
That's right. And I gotta say, the one time that I flooded, I needed a new pad every 20 minutes for a whole day.
Oh my God.
So if you have the misfortune of that happening in a performance situation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I've just got this image of her bag and a diaper bag and
that's a diaper bag.
So we should probably, if there is heavy bleeding like that, we often just assume that it's due to perimenopause, and very often it is. But if anybody who is having that really should talk to their
Thank you, Joanne.
Whoever it is, a gynecologist, primary care doctor, just mention that, because it could be that, but it could be something else. And it's not hard to check that out and make sure it's not something more serious. And sometimes there are some medications. Always check them out with a laryngologist. They can help with that. And just be aware if you do try a new medication that's hormonally based, even like a Mirena coil, pay attention to the voice. Pay attention to your voice. If you feel that your voice has changed in a not good way, Just keep track of that.
And it doesn't matter. You could do all the research on the internet that you want about the impact of the Mirena coil on the voice. It doesn't matter at all until you find out what it does to you.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
because the dosages, we all have different hormone levels that are appropriate for our bodies. And estrogen and progesterone and testosterone have really dramatic impacts on the vocal folds as well as the rest of the body.
And for those of you who haven't read our book yet, in chapter 3, we list what the effects of reproductive hormones are and their balance, their relationships on the larynx and the vocal folds and on your singing in general and the tissues. Honestly, that chapter is useful for any woman in any biological phase of her life.
Yes.
When we have talked to women who are singers, what kind of, what are they saying about what their voice seems to, everybody is different, but what are some of the vocal tendencies? If the voice is acting up, how would you sort of sum those changes up?
One woman came to me when she was perimenopause, and she had sort of, her voice had thinned in the middle and lower range. It thinned and lowered, and then she was getting laryngeal spasms that were causing great amounts of coughing.
Mm.
And she also had severe acid reflux. This is someone who is fairly petite and a jazz and blues singer. My thought at the time was, there's more than one thing going on here. Mm-hmm. Which is very often happens, because acid reflux can start to happen as the neurological impulses slow down a little bit due to the natural process of aging. But it can also be caused, and then that acid reflux will, you know how it works with singers, it will burn the bottom of the larynx, or it will cause the folds to thicken and swell, or cause severe pain. And when you're bracing against that pain, you don't have access to the flexibility in this part of the anatomy that you need. Mm-hmm. So that's one multi-pronged situation. And now that she is past menopause, and we worked together for about 3 years, she is doing really, really, really well.
Yeah, that's great news that you could have struggles in perimenopause and you might just have this grace period afterwards.
Right.
For me, I think that the biggest thing that I've heard from people in perimenopause is unpredictability. Right. I don't know if my voice is going to be good enough tomorrow. It is today, but it wasn't yesterday. And we know, the three of us know by looking at the hormone charts of how it works in perimenopause, that is completely understandable. That it's unpredictable. And then the other thing that took me by surprise, and I know it took you by surprise, was the unpredictability of our ear. That during perimenopause, nothing to do with aging voice or ear or brain, during perimenopause, that we would hear pitches a little bit different, maybe singing a little bit flat, maybe singing a little bit sharp, maybe just not being able to hear a tonal center, making harmonizing really hard.
And when you've never had trouble with harmonizing, or you grew up with it, suddenly you're going,
I literally thought, I must have become a bad harmonizer. Wait, no, I haven't, and I didn't, and I've got it all back. It was temporary, but it happened.
Our ear hears, but our brain actually really hears. And just, I keep coming up with, because that was really hard for me, and it got better. I can sing in harmony now. I can sight read, but there was a period like Nancy describes where I just had.
So all three of us experienced that.
Yeah.
But none of us knew it until we started to talk about it together.
Right.
And then we all went, oh yeah, me.
Yeah. Talk about embarrassing.
Mm-hmm. It was very difficult. So we have unpredictability. We've already, in other places we've talked about, the voice may shift a little bit lower, but not necessarily. You may still have those, high might be accessible, but not necessarily wanting to live up there. I heard Dr. Sims talked about vocal neighborhoods. Our voice sort of has neighborhoods, and I love that analogy, and I hope Dr. Sims, thank you for that. But your voice may feel like, I just can't live in that uptown neighborhood. Now I got to go move downtown just a little bit, but that neighborhood may shift from
Yes.
day to day, and that's a little bit
You can
frustrating.
still visit the other neighborhood, but you might not want to sleep there every night.
That's right. You might not want to overnight there. So,
And that can shift into postmenopause too.
yes, exactly. So I think that is not an abnormal thing to think about. Also, timbre can change as well, right? The larynx does, again, I'm going to use the age word, does drop down a little bit with age, just like other things drop down a little bit. Yes. Any rate, so that's going to lengthen the vocal tract just a little bit, but that even a tiny bit of lengthening will change your timbre. And so
That brings me to I've talked with more than one professional singer in their 40s who've said, I'm singing better now than I have in my entire life.
right.
And so it can be a time of great celebration and joy in your voice. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think I heard one voice teacher say they had a student whose voice was going 7 different ways at once. Yeah, we laugh now, but I think that what is probably the most difficult thing. And then making sure that ideally working with a teacher that help us to avoid getting into funky habits in our singing.
Yes, that's huge.
They're called
Compensatory
or maladaptations. I speak for myself. I certainly did for a while because my voice was it wasn't behaving itself. It felt like somebody put a new larynx in my throat.
Well, and if our ear expects to hear our 20-year-old voice, which it no longer is, then our body will subconsciously compensate to create the sound that we expect to hear. And so we have to give ourselves permission to have our voices changing through our entire lives.
And if we get into funky voice habits, have someone help us with that, because that sometimes we don't even know that we're doing them, and there's no guilt intended on that. It's just as much as if you sprain your ankle, you're going to accommodate your gait a little bit, right? But long term, after everything's healed up, you don't want to, be doing that. So that's important.
I want to talk a little bit about ego adjustments. Because this happens a lot, and this is a time of life when you're being called upon. I mean, this is a bit of a metaphor, but you're being called upon to become more authentic, whatever that means. And if you are tied into a belief system, you believe this about yourself, you believe that about your neighbor, you believe this about your religion. If you are tied into a belief system and your voice starts changing, what does that mean for your belief system?
Or your identity.
And for your identity. So what we'll get women who will say, well, I'm known for my high B flat.
You mean the woman whose email address is soprano@gmail.com?
There we go. Yeah. I'm known for my high B flat. I can soar on my descants, and that's how I contribute to worship. And I understand that. I've been there. But when that starts being challenged, who are you? How do you worship? How do you show ecstasy in a community situation? It all starts. It's like the bottom starts to drop out a little bit, or if you are known for your operatic role of whatever, if you're known for sounding like Nina Simone and suddenly you don't anymore, what does that mean? And I think that if you are not able to live with uncertainty, if you're not able to live well in a liminal space, you have to give yourself grace and compassion to not know. And in this day and age where we want experts for everything, and you have to learn the technique to give you the marketable skills. That whole frame set doesn't necessarily fit with this process that we go through. And
it can fit the male voice much more easily than the female voice.
Yes.
I said that.
No, it's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
So hang in there.
So hang in there and seek out talking with other people who are going through this same thing. And back to the idea everybody's on his own journey, but there's a certain freedom in letting go of your identity. My therapist used to talk about it like this. You've got this rusting infrastructure of your life.
Okay.
And you're trying to build new infrastructure, but you can't take out the whole thing at once because you'll collapse. Right. You have to take out a little bit and then build something else. Take out another little bit and build something else. That's how you eventually get through.
That's a great way of looking at it. All right. Well, I think that probably is a good place for us to wrap up this conversation. Is there any last thoughts that either of you want to share?
I just like that analogy, not just for your life in general, but just kind of for your voice too. Sometimes,
well, that was and that was a big point.
Little baby step here, little baby step here, and then that makes things work better in the long run.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yep. Yeah. Great. All right. Thank you, ladies.
Bye.
Bye.